The dress had been chosen by someone who wanted her to disappear. Bonnie understood that only when she was already standing at the entrance of the grand hall, her fingers laced together over the front of her gown, feeling the rough texture of the fabric against her palms. The other Omegas around her wore silk and velvet dyed in deep plum, forest green, and rich burgundy, colors that caught the candlelight and held it. Her gown was pale gray linen, the kind servants wore on washing days, simple, forgettable, the kind of color that made a person look like part of the wall. Her stepmother had pressed it into her hands that very morning, smiling with all her teeth showing. "You will look modest. Modest is appropriate for an Omega of your station." Bonnie had said nothing. She had learned, in the years since her father's death, that words spent on Lady Voss were words thrown into a fire. They produced heat. Nothing else. She straightened her spine now and lifted her chin, even though her heart was hammering against her ribs in a way that felt almost violent. The grand hall of Ashenvale stretched before her, an enormous vaulted space carved from pale stone, its ceiling lost somewhere above rows of iron chandeliers dripping with candles. Tapestries covered the high walls in deep reds and golds, depicting hunting scenes and the crests of old noble houses. The air smelled of beeswax and pine resin, of expensive perfume layered over cold stone, of roasted herbs carried on heat from the enormous hearths flanking either side of the room. It was the night of the presentation ball. Every 3 years, the noble houses of the Ashenvale region brought their unbonded Omegas before the Council of Alphas, where alliances were forged, matches proposed, and the future of bloodlines decided. For most of the young women around her, this night represented possibility. For Bonnie, it had always felt more like an inspection. She was 23 years old. She had attended the last presentation at 20, and had returned home without a single formal offer. Her stepmother had not let her forget it. The herald at the door called names one by one. Each Omega descended the 3 shallow steps into the hall, to a murmur of voices, a sweep of appraising eyes, the polite applause of assembled nobles and their alpha sons. Bonnie watched them go. She watched the way the alphas leaned toward one another to whisper. She watched how the candle glow fell on silk and made it look like water. Her name was called. She walked down the steps. The murmur that followed her was not the same kind. She heard it the way one hears rain beginning. At first just a drop, then another. Then the unmistakable sound of something falling everywhere at once. A ripple of quiet laughter from somewhere to the left. A woman's voice, not bothering to lower itself. "Is that the Voss ward? The gray one?" A man's voice answering, low and amused. "The Omega with no wolf. They still present her?" Bonnie kept walking. She had no wolf. That was the truth that followed her everywhere like a second shadow. She had been born an Omega. The scent was there, the softness of it, the particular warmth that other wolves recognized instinctively. But her inner wolf had never spoken, never stirred. In a world where a wolf's presence was proof of worth, of power, of belonging, her silence meant she was considered incomplete, broken, less. She reached her designated place along the row and stood still, hands clasped, looking straight ahead at the far wall. Lord Devon Ashvale approached her 20 minutes later. He was the son of the region's most powerful Alpha Lord, broad-shouldered and golden-haired, with the easy confidence of someone who had never once doubted his place in any room. Bonnie had known him since childhood. He had been kind to her once, or she had believed he was kind, which she was beginning to understand was not the same thing. He had been courting her, in the quiet way that things were done. Visits to the Voss estate, long conversations in the garden, small gifts left with the steward. For 8 months, she had allowed herself to believe it meant something. He stopped in front of her now and offered a bow, shallow and formal. His eyes did not quite meet hers. "Lady Bonnie." "Lord Devon." The silence between them was wrong. She felt it immediately. the way the air between two people can change temperature without warning. His jaw was set. His hands were clasped behind his back. He was not here to greet her. He was here to finish something. "I wish to speak to you before the formal proceedings," he said, keeping his voice low. It seemed the right thing, to tell you directly. She waited. "My father has formalized an arrangement with Lady Seraphine Callow." He paused. "It was decided last fortnight. Last fortnight. 8 months of garden walks, 8 months of small gifts and soft words. And last fortnight, without a word to her, it had been decided." "I see," Bonnie said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Somewhere beneath her ribs, something was pulling tight, the way rope pulls when a knot is tested. She did not let it show. She had practice in that particular art. "You are a fine woman," Davon said, and the words landed with the weight of a stone dropped into still water, kindly meant, utterly useless. "But my father the council requires, a wolf, a full bond, you understand?" "I understand perfectly," she said. He nodded, relieved, and moved away. Bonnie stood in her place along the row and breathed in slowly through her nose. Beeswax, pine resin, the faint metallic edge of the iron chandeliers, cold stone beneath her thin slippers. She would not cry, not here, not in front of every alpha house in the region. With Lady Voss watching from the balcony above with that particular expression she wore when things were going exactly as she had planned. Because this had been planned. Bonnie understood that now with a cold, clear certainty. The gray linen dress. The last-minute information that Davon's family had already settled on another. The way her stepmother had arranged her position in the hall. Visible enough to be present. Unremarkable enough to be pitied. This was not an accident of circumstance. This was architecture. A commotion began at the far end of the hall. Not loud, more like a change in air pressure. A collective stillness that spread through the crowd the way silence spreads when something very large moves. Heads turned, conversations stopped. The musicians, who had been playing a quiet melodic piece near the far hearth, faltered and went quiet. Bonnie turned her head. The great doors of the grand hall, which had been standing open all evening, now framed 3 figures. 2 of them were guards, tall, armored in dark plate with wolf crests at the shoulder. But it was the 3rd figure that had emptied the room of sound. He was not announced. He did not need to be. He stood with the ease of someone who had never once in his life needed to announce himself, because every room he entered already knew. He was tall, genuinely tall, not the kind of height that comes from good boots, but the kind built into bone and standing. Dark braids fell past his shoulders, gathered back from a face that was all sharp angles and contained stillness. Jaw, cheekbone, brow, all cut from the same unyielding material. His eyes, catching the candlelight at that distance, were an unsettling shade of blue. Not soft blue. Not sky blue. The blue of deep water, where light changes character. He wore black leather, crossed with dark straps and buckles, a heavy fur mantle across his shoulders that moved with him like it had weight and intent. There were old scars on his forearms, visible below the leather bracers, not decorative. Real. Bonnie had never seen him in person. She had heard the name, the way everyone in the kingdom heard the name, spoken carefully, deliberately, the way one speaks near something that could cut. Caius, the Lycan king. She did not understand why he was here. The presentation ball of a regional noble house was far beneath the attention of a Lycan king. Every person in the room seemed to be asking the same question with their eyes. Caius walked into the hall slowly, his guard staying 2 steps behind. He did not look at the assembled alphas. He did not acknowledge the council table. His gaze moved across the row of omegas with the particular quality of someone who was searching for something specific. Not browsing, not appraising. Looking. It stopped on Bonnie. She felt it before she fully processed it. A physical thing. That gaze, like a hand placed flat against the sternum. Her breath caught. She stood in her gray linen dress, with her blonde braid over one shoulder and her hands still clasped in front of her, and the most powerful alpha in the known kingdom was looking directly at her. He crossed the hall. The crowd parted without him asking. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell him. Pine smoke, cold iron, something deeper and darker beneath, like earth after rain. His blue eyes held hers and did not waver. Around them, not a single person breathed. "Bonnie of the Voss household," he said. His voice was low, unhurried, the kind of voice that did not need volume to be heard in every corner of the room. She could not imagine how he knew her name. "Yes," she managed. "I have a proposal," Caius said. And then, in front of every alpha lord, every noble house, every person who had spent the evening pretending she was part of the wall, he said it plainly, as if it were the most reasonable thing in the world. "I am asking you to be my queen." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Bonnie had ever heard. No one moved. Bonnie was certain of that, because the stillness in the grand hall had become something almost physical, a held breath stretched so thin it might tear. The candlelight kept burning. The pine resin kept its sharp scent in the air, but every person in that room had turned to stone the moment the words left Caius's mouth, and she stood at the center of it, feeling as though the floor beneath her thin slippers had quietly shifted. She searched his face for something she recognized. A smirk, a flicker of cruelty. Some sign that this was a performance designed to humiliate her in a more elaborate fashion than Devon had managed. She found none of it. His expression was composed and entirely serious. Those deep water blue eyes fixed on her with a steadiness that made it harder, not easier, to breathe. "You do not know me," she said. Her voice came out quieter than she intended, but it did not shake. "I know enough," Caius replied. "That is not an answer." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but a softening at the corner of his mouth that suggested he had not expected her to push back. He did not seem displeased by it. "No," he agreed. "It is not. But this is not the place for the full answer." His gaze moved briefly across the assembled crowd. A single sweep, unhurried, that somehow managed to communicate that he was aware of every person watching and was entirely unbothered by them. "Will you walk with me?" Bonnie became aware of Lady Voss. She did not need to look up at the balcony to feel her stepmother's presence. She had lived with that particular weight pressing down on her for 6 years, and she knew its texture. She also became aware of Devon, somewhere behind and to her left, standing with Lady Seraphine's family, very still. She thought about the gray dress. She thought about the word modest delivered with a full showing of teeth. "Yes," she said. "I will walk with you." Caius stepped back and extended one arm, not grabbing or guiding, simply offering. She placed her hand on his forearm, leather, warm from his body, solid in a way that was faintly startling, and they walked together toward the far end of the hall, where a corridor branched off toward the estate's older wing. The crowd parted again. It always would, she realized, for him. The corridor was narrow and cooler than the hall, lit by iron sconces holding tallow candles that guttered in a draft from somewhere above. The sound of the ball receded behind them, swallowed by stone. Caius's guards remained at the corridor entrance, far enough back for the conversation to be private. He stopped near a deep-set window overlooking the inner courtyard. Below, she could see the shapes of horses at the tether posts, stable boys moving with lanterns in the dark. The glass was old and wavy, distorting the light into long gold ribbons. "You are wondering why," he said. "I have several questions," Bonnie said carefully. "That is the first one." He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his tone did not shift toward performance or persuasion. He spoke the way someone speaks when they have decided on plainness. My council has been pressing the matter of a queen for 2 years. There have been candidates, daughters of alpha lords, daughters of allied houses, all carefully selected for bloodline and rank. He paused. None of them were acceptable to me. And I am? She heard the edge in her own voice. I am an omega with no wolf, from a household that considers gray linen appropriate for a presentation ball. By every measure your council uses, I am the least acceptable candidate in that hall. By their measures, Kaya said, yes. Then why? He looked at her directly. Because I have been watching this region for 6 months. Because I received a report 3 weeks ago from my intelligence keeper, a man I trust completely, about the Voss household, about what has been done to it since Lord Edric Voss died. A pause. About what has been done to his daughter. The air in the corridor felt suddenly thinner. What kind of report? Bonnie said, and it was not quite a question. The kind that details a stepmother petitioning the regional council to have an Omega ward declared unfit for inheritance on the grounds of her absent wolf. He said it quietly, without drama. The kind that includes forged documents, testimony from paid witnesses, a curandero's record altered to suggest mental instability. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The petition was filed 4 days ago. It will be heard within the fortnight. Bonnie gripped the stone ledge of the windowsill. She had not known. She had suspected something. She would have been a fool not to, given 6 years of small cruelties and systematic removals of everything that had once been hers. But she had not known it had progressed this far, that it had taken this specific shape. Her father's estate, the lands in the Northern Valley, the wool trade arrangements he had built over 30 years, all of it held in trust for her until her bonding or her 25th year, whichever came first. All of it currently administered by Lady Voss. 25th year. Bonnie was 23, less than 2 years away from the moment the trust would close in her favor, and her stepmother had finally moved to cut her off before the threshold could be reached. The forged documents, Bonnie said, her voice careful and very controlled. The witnesses. Can they be proven false? With the right authority, yes. And you have that authority. I am the Lycan king, Caius said, with no particular pride in it, only fact. I have absolute authority over every council and tribunal in this kingdom. A petition filed in a regional court can be suspended, investigated, and overturned by royal decree. Your stepmother's case would collapse within a week of my involvement. Bonnie turned away from the window. She looked at him. Really looked. The way she had not permitted herself to do in the hall, because looking too directly at him felt dangerous in a way she could not yet name. He was watching her with that same quality of attention she had noticed before. Not appraising, not calculating, just present, fully present, in the way that very few people ever were. You are offering me protection, she said. I am offering you marriage, he said. Protection is part of it. But I want to be clear about what I am not doing. I am not offering you a transaction in which you exchange your obedience for my shield. I am not asking you to be grateful or compliant or decorative. A pause. I am asking you to be my queen. That means counsel, presence in the court, a voice in decisions that affect this kingdom. Real work, with real weight. You do not know whether I am capable of that. I told you, I know enough. She studied him for a long moment. The corridor was cold and the candle nearest them was burning low, dropping wax in slow curls onto the iron sconce. From somewhere far away came the faint sound of the musicians beginning again in the grand hall. I do not trust easily, Bonnie said. I want you to understand that plainly before I give any answer. I have spent 6 years in a household that smiled while it was dismantling everything my father left me. And I have spent this evening being publicly discarded by a man I had allowed myself to believe was something other than convenient. I am not disposed toward trust at this moment. I am not asking for your trust, Caius said. Not tonight. I am asking for your answer." She breathed in slowly. Pine smoke. Cold stone. The particular stillness of a man who was not trying to fill silence with reassurance. That, more than anything, was what steadied her. A man who did not rush to fill her silence with promises was not the same kind of man she had known before. "I have a condition," she said. "Name it." "My father's estate. Whatever legal action you take, whatever authority you apply to overturn my stepmother's petition. I want the process to be transparent. I want the forged documents presented before the full council. I want the witnesses named publicly. I do not want this resolved quietly in a back chamber where the truth is buried under a polite settlement." She held his gaze. "I want it to be visible. What she did. All of it." Caius was quiet for a moment. "That can be arranged," he said. "Then my answer is yes," Bonnie said. "Conditionally, I will travel to your court. I will consider this arrangement properly, with full information, but I will not be a queen who does not understand the kingdom she is entering, and I will not be moved somewhere new before the matter of my father's estate is formally addressed." Something in Caius's expression shifted again, that same almost movement at the corner of his mouth. "You are not what I expected," he said. "No one ever is," Bonnie said, "when they have spent long enough being told to take up less space." She turned back toward the corridor, toward the sound of the music and the hall full of people who had watched her be dismissed twice in one evening and would now need to recalibrate everything they thought they understood. She paused without turning around. "Lord Caius," she said. "Your Grace," he corrected mildly. "Your Grace." She let the correction settle. "What was in that report about me that made you decide I was acceptable when every other candidate was not?" A pause. "You stayed standing," he said. "When Devon Ashvale walked away from you tonight, you did not flinch. You did not look to anyone for comfort. You simply stayed standing." Another pause. "I have been a king for 11 years. I have learned to look for the people who stay standing. They are rarer than anyone admits." Bonnie said nothing. She walked back toward the light of the grand hall. And for the first time that evening, the gray linen dress felt like something she had chosen. Lady Voss was waiting for her at the top of the stairs. That was how Bonnie knew the evening had gone badly for her stepmother, not by the expression on her face, which was as composed as ever, a careful arrangement of soft concern and faint displeasure, but by the fact that she was waiting at all. Lady Voss did not wait. She summoned. The distinction had always been important to her. She was a tall woman, sharp-boned and elegant, with dark hair pinned under a headdress of burgundy velvet that matched her gown precisely. She had been beautiful once, in the way that certain weapons are beautiful, designed for it, as part of their function. At 44, she was still striking, still deliberate in every movement, still capable of making Bonnie feel 12 years old with a single look. She did not produce that look tonight. Instead, she produced something more unsettling. Stillness. "Come," she said. Simply that. Bonnie followed her into the small antechamber off the balcony, a narrow room with a single window and 2 chairs that no one ever used. A servant hovered near the door. Lady Voss dismissed him with a gesture and closed the door herself. "Whatever you are thinking of doing," her stepmother said, turning to face her, "I want you to consider it very carefully." "I have considered it," Bonnie said. "He approached you on impulse. Men like that, powerful men, men accustomed to spectacle, sometimes make gestures they do not intend to honor. By morning, he will have moved on. If you embarrass this household by appearing to take his offer seriously—" "It was a formal proposal," Bonnie said, "made before the full assembly of the regional council and every alpha lord in Ashenvale. That is not a gesture. Something moved behind Lady Voss's eyes. Not fear, not yet, but an adjustment, a recalculation. "You have no idea what that court is," she said, and her voice had dropped into something quieter and more deliberate. "You have no idea what he is. The Lycan king does not take Omega queens. It has not been done in 3 generations. Whatever he told you, whatever he promised in that corridor, and yes, I know you walked with him. It is a political maneuver. You are a pawn. You will go to that court, and you will discover that very quickly. And by then, there will be nothing left for you here." Bonnie looked at her stepmother for a long moment. She thought about the petition filed 4 days ago, the forged documents, the paid witnesses, the curandero's record altered to suggest instability. She thought about all of it sitting in a regional court chamber, waiting to be heard, and she thought about how carefully it had all been built while Lady Voss sat across from her at the supper table every evening and asked whether she had slept well. "I know about the petition," Bonnie said quietly. The stillness in Lady Voss's face cracked, just slightly, just for a moment. A tightening around the eyes. A breath held a half-second too long. "I do not know what you—" The filing with the regional council, the witnesses, the altered records from the curandero. Bonnie kept her voice even, not angry, not trembling, even. "I know what you have been building, and I know why. My 25th year, the trust closing, my father's estate passing fully to me." She paused. "You have been very thorough. I will give you that." Lady Voss said nothing. That, more than any denial, told Bonnie everything she needed to confirm. "I am leaving with the Lycan King's party at first light," Bonnie said. "I suggest you use the time between now and then to consider what happens when the petition is examined by someone with royal authority, and all of its components are found to be fabricated." She turned and opened the door. "Bonnie," her stepmother's voice came from behind her, and for the first time in 6 years, it had lost its smooth, managed surface. Something raw was showing underneath. "Your father would not want this for you." Bonnie stopped. She did not turn around. "My father," she said, "would want the truth of what you did to his estate to be spoken aloud in front of every person who witnessed his name being used. So in that, at least, we will finally give him what he deserves." She walked out and did not look back. She did not sleep that night. Her chamber in the Ashenvale estate guest wing was small and simply furnished, a narrow bed with wool blankets, a washstand with a ceramic basin, a single candle burning on the shelf above it. She sat on the edge of the bed in her gray linen dress and looked at the opposite wall and thought, in a careful and methodical way, about everything that had happened in the past several hours. A man she had believed was courting her had dismissed her publicly. Her stepmother had filed legal documents designed to destroy what remained of her father's legacy. And the Lycan King, a man she had never met before tonight, a man whose name was spoken with careful deliberation across the entire kingdom, had walked into a regional presentation ball and asked her to marry him. Any one of those events would have been sufficient for a single evening. She pressed her palms flat against her knees and breathed. She was not naive about what was happening. Caius had been honest, more honest than anyone had been with her in years. But honesty was not the same as transparency, and a king's proposal was never without political dimension. She understood that she was useful to him in some way that went beyond whatever the report from his intelligence keeper had contained. A Lycan king choosing an Omega with no wolf as his queen was not a sentimental decision. There was strategy in it. She simply did not yet know what the strategy was. But she also understood her own position with complete clarity. The petition was real. The forgeries were real. Left unchallenged, within a fortnight she would be legally declared unfit to inherit, and everything her father had spent his life building would pass permanently into Lady Voss's hands. Staying in Ashenvale meant watching that happen with no recourse and no power to stop it. Caius was offering recourse. Caius was offering power. She was not fool enough to refuse it, because the source was unfamiliar. She would go. She would watch. She would learn what she could, and keep her own counsel. And she would not make the mistake of trusting too quickly, simply because someone had been kind to her, when she expected cruelty. A soft knock at her chamber door broke the silence. She crossed to it and opened it a few inches. On the other side stood a young woman she did not recognize. A girl of perhaps 18, dressed in the dark livery of the Lycan king's household. Her brown hair pulled back tightly. She carried a folded cloth over one arm. "From His Grace," the girl said, and held it out. Bonnie took it. It was a cloak. Heavy wool in deep charcoal, lined with something soft and dark, fastened with a silver clasp engraved with a running wolf. Not the gray linen kind of charcoal, the kind that had been dyed deliberately, with care, to be worn and seen. There was no note, no explanation. She understood it anyway. "You will not arrive at my court wearing what someone else chose to make you invisible." She set it carefully on the bed and looked at it for a long moment, her hands loose at her sides. Then she began to pack the small things she would take with her. A linen shift, her mother's carved wooden comb, the letter her father had written her the winter before he died, kept folded in the inner pocket of her traveling bag because she could not bring herself to leave it behind anywhere. Small things. The things that were genuinely hers. The courtyard at dawn was cold and smelled of horses and frost. Bonnie descended the estate steps in the charcoal cloak, her blonde braid over one shoulder, her bag carried by one of Caius's guards who had appeared at her door without being asked. The Lycan King's traveling party was already assembled. 6 riders, a covered carriage with the royal wolf crest on its door, 2 supply horses, and Caius himself standing near the lead horse speaking quietly with one of his men. He looked different in morning light, harder, somehow, and more real. The candlelight of the grand hall had given him the quality of something almost mythological. In the gray pre-dawn, he was simply a very large, very contained man with dark braids and old scars on his forearms, who turned his head when she descended the steps and gave her a brief, steady look that conveyed nothing except acknowledgement. He did not comment on the cloak. She did not thank him for it. Both things felt correct. "The road to Caer Dun is 3 days' ride," he said, approaching. "There is a way station on the second night. We will stop there. I would like to send word to my father's former steward before we leave Ashenvale," she said. "A man named Oswin. He has served the Voss estate for 20 years, and he will know where the original estate documents are held. If your intelligence keeper is building a case against the petition, Oswin's testimony will matter." Caius considered this for a moment. He turned to the man beside him, a lean, watchful figure with a close-cropped beard and the quiet manner of someone trained in discretion. "See to it," he said. The man nodded and moved away without a word. Caius looked back at Bonnie. "Anything else?" "Not yet," she said. "But I expect I will think of something." That almost movement appeared at the corner of his mouth again, brief, gone before it fully arrived. "I expect you will," he said, and turned back toward the horses. Bonnie looked up at the Ashenvale estate, its pale stone face, its rows of narrow windows, the balcony where Lady Voss had stood last night, watching everything unravel from above. None of the windows showed light now. The household was still sleeping, or pretending to be. She turned away from it. She climbed into the carriage, settled the charcoal cloak around her shoulders, and did not look back as the wheels began to move. The road to Caer Dun cut north through dense pine forest for most of the first day, the trees pressing close on either side until the sky above the carriage became a narrow gray ribbon threaded between dark branches. Bonnie watched it through the carriage window and tried to organize her thoughts the way her father had taught her to organize his ledgers. One column at a time, nothing carried over until the current line was complete. What she knew. Lady Voss had filed a legal petition to have her declared unfit for inheritance. The petition contained forged documents and paid testimony. Caius had known about it before approaching her. Caius had resources, authority, and an intelligence keeper whose reports were detailed enough to include the name of her household curandero. What she did not know: why the Lycan king had been watching the Ashenvale region for 6 months. What he wanted from her beyond the political utility of the marriage. What Caer Dun was like. What a queen without a wolf was expected to be in a court built on wolf hierarchy. She added that last item to the column and looked at it for a while. The carriage slowed near midday to water the horses at a stream crossing. Through the window she could see Caius dismounting, speaking with one of his riders, pointing at something on the road ahead with a brief gesture. He moved without excess. Every motion had the particular economy of someone who had learned long ago that authority did not require display. The door of the carriage opened. Bonnie expected the young maidservant, the brown-haired girl from last night, whose name she had learned was Petra. But it was Caius himself, ducking slightly to avoid the low frame, settling into the seat across from her with the ease of a man entering a space he had always intended to occupy. He carried 2 small cloth-wrapped parcels, which he set on the seat beside him. He produced one and held it out without preamble. She unwrapped it. Dark bread, hard cheese, dried apple slices. She ate, because she was hungry, and there was no reason to refuse food out of pride. "You have been thinking," he said. It was not a question. "Consistently," she agreed. "Ask what you want to ask." Bonnie looked at him across the narrow space. In the gray forest light coming through the window, his eyes were a different quality of blue. Deeper, less startling, more like still water than open sky. "Why were you watching Ashenvale?" she asked. "Lord Davin Ashvale's father has been meeting privately with 3 other regional alpha lords over the past year. The meetings are informal, undocumented, and have been held at rotating locations to avoid pattern." He paused. "In my kingdom, when 4 alpha lords hold undocumented meetings, I pay attention. You think they are building something. I think they are testing how much they can build without my knowledge before deciding whether to build openly." He broke a piece of bread, unhurried. "Ashenvale is the wealthiest of the 4 regions. The wool trade alone accounts for a significant portion of the northern revenue. Whoever controls Ashenvale effectively controls the economic argument for any political challenge." Bonnie was quiet for a moment. "My father's estate," she said slowly. "The Northern Valley lands, the wool trade arrangements." "Yes." "Lady Voss has been administering them for 6 years, and she has been meeting with Lord Ashvale Sr." It was not a question either. The shape of it was assembling itself clearly and coldly in her mind. She is not simply trying to secure the estate for herself. She is holding it for them. Caius looked at her with an expression that confirmed it without requiring words. "The petition to have me declared unfit," Bonnie said. "If it succeeds, the estate remains in her control indefinitely. She never remarried after my father. She holds the property as widow administrator, and if I am legally removed from inheritance, there is no one to contest it." She set down the bread. "They needed me gone, not just marginalized. Gone." "Correct. And you needed me not gone," Bonnie said carefully. "Because an Omega declared unfit loses all legal standing, including the standing to give testimony about what was done to her father's estate." She met his eyes. "With me present, and with royal authority behind the investigation, the records can be examined, and the network behind the petition becomes visible." "You understand it quickly," Caius said. "My father was a merchant lord before he was a noble," Bonnie said. "He taught me to read arrangements. He said the truth of any agreement was never in what was said, but in who benefited from the outcome." She picked up the bread again. "I have been reading arrangements for years. I simply did not have the resources to act on them." Caius was quiet for a moment. "There is more," he said. She waited. Your father did not die of the illness recorded in the estate documents. The bread in her hand became very heavy. The curandero's records, the originals before they were altered, indicate a different progression. One more consistent with slow poisoning than with the lung sickness listed as cause of death. He said it quietly, without cruelty, watching her face. I did not want to tell you in the hall last night. I did not want to tell you until you were away from that house. Bonnie set the bread down. She looked at the window. The pine trees moved past in long, dark rows, endless and indifferent. The stream crossing was behind them now, the sound of water already gone. Her father had been ill for 8 months before he died. She had sat with him. She had read to him from his merchant ledgers when his eyes were too tired to focus. She had held his hand on the last morning and felt the specific weight of a hand that had stopped gripping back. She had believed it was the illness. Everyone had believed it was the illness. Lady Voss had wept at the funeral with great and convincing sorrow, and Bonnie, who had been 17 and completely alone, had almost found comfort in it. The curandero, she said. Her voice was very controlled. Is he still in Ashenvale? He left the region 2 years ago. My intelligence keeper has located him in a village 3 days east of Caer Dun. He is living quietly and has not practiced his trade since leaving. A pause. Men who leave a trade abruptly usually do so because they cannot live with something they were asked to do. He altered the records, Bonnie said. He was there. He knows what my father actually died of. Yes. Can he be brought to Caer Dun? Already arranged, Caius said. She turned from the window and looked at him. He was watching her with the same quality of attention he had brought to every moment of this. That full and steady presence, not crowding her grief, not rushing to minimize it, not filling the space with reassurance. Just there. She felt the grief anyway, a cold wave of it, moving through her chest, behind her eyes, into the back of her throat. She did not push it away. She let it move, and then she let it settle. And when it had settled, she was still sitting upright in the carriage with her hands in her lap, and everything she now knew had added itself to the column she had been keeping. I want her to answer for it, Bonnie said, not quietly, not through some private arrangement that protects the Ashvale family from scandal. I want her to answer for my father in front of people who knew him. She will, Caius said. You are very certain of things. I am certain of the things I have prepared for, he said. The rest I approach carefully. She studied him for a moment. And which category do I fall into? He considered the question with apparent seriousness. At present, he said, you are somewhere between the two. It was the most honest answer anyone had given her in recent memory, and despite everything, the grief sitting newly heavy in her chest, the exhaustion pulling at the edges of her eyes, the cold reality of everything she had just been told. She felt something shift very slightly in the careful distance she had been keeping. Not trust. Not yet. Something smaller. The first loosening of a knot she had been holding tightly for a very long time. The way station on the second night was a stone building set back from the road, low-roofed and solid, smelling of old wood smoke and dried herbs. The keeper was a weathered woman who took one look at Caius and his party and moved with admirable efficiency to produce hot broth, fresh bread, and rooms with actual fires laid in them. Bonnie sat close to the fire in the room they had given her, and let the heat work on the cold that had settled in her during the carriage ride. Petra brought her broth, and then quietly left her alone. She was almost asleep when she heard it. A sound from the corridor, soft and deliberate. Not footsteps. Something lower. She went to the door and opened it a few inches. In the corridor, a large wolf sat 3 feet from her door. Not an attacking posture, not a threatening one. Simply sitting, massive and dark-furred, with eyes that caught the torchlight from the wall sconce and reflected it back in a shade of blue that was entirely unmistakable. Bonnie looked at the wolf for a long moment. The wolf looked back. "You could have simply said goodnight," she said quietly. The wolf's ears moved, just slightly, a small adjustment that might, in a certain light, have been interpreted as amusement. She closed the door gently and went back to the fire. She sat with the knowledge that the Lycan king had chosen to spend the night in his wolf form outside her door, and she turned it over in her mind carefully, looking at it from every angle. He had not announced it. He had not asked permission or made it a gesture she was required to acknowledge. He had simply been there, between her and whatever the dark corridor held. A man who protected without requiring gratitude for it was a new kind of man entirely. She pulled the charcoal cloak around her shoulders and closed her eyes, and for the first time in longer than she could measure, she slept, without listening for sounds she dreaded. Care Done announced itself before it was visible. The smell reached her first. Pine smoke carried on cold mountain air, the mineral sharpness of stone recently cut, the distant sweetness of burning cedar wood from hearths already lit against the morning chill. Then the sound. Hooves on a paved road, the hollow rhythm of iron on fitted stone replacing the softer percussion of forest earth. Then, finally, the sight of it through the carriage window as the road curved around the last tree line and opened into full view. It was larger than she had imagined, not wider. It did not sprawl the way market towns did, but taller, rising in layers up the face of a dark granite ridge, walls within walls, towers at each elevation, the highest keep catching the pale morning light and holding it like a crown. Banners hung from the upper battlements, black with a silver wolf running across them, moving slowly in the wind off the mountain. Bonnie watched it grow as they descended toward the main gate and said nothing. The gates opened without a herald. The guards on the walls had seen the party coming from a distance, and the whole machinery of the king's return had set itself in motion quietly, efficiently, without fanfare. That told her something about how this court was run. She filed it in the column. Inside the outer walls, the castle yard was wide and cobbled, smelling of horses and iron and the particular cold stone smell of very old buildings. Stable hands emerged. The supply horses were led away. Caius dismounted with the ease of long habit and came directly to the carriage door before any of his men could reach it, opening it himself and offering his hand. She took it. His grip was steady and warm. "Welcome to Care Done," he said. Nothing elaborate. Just that. The next days moved with a deliberate pace that Bonnie gradually understood was intentional. Caius was giving her time to find her bearings before the weight of what came next descended. She was given a chamber in the east wing, spacious and stone-walled, with a deep hearth and windows that overlooked the inner courtyard garden, where evergreen hedges had been cut into careful shapes. Petra attended her. The castle's head housekeeper, a broad and competent woman named Marta, appeared on the first morning with a measured efficiency that managed to be both welcoming and entirely businesslike, showing Bonnie the essential corridors, the great hall, the council chamber, the library. The library was where Bonnie spent most of her first 2 days. It occupied 2 floors of the north tower, shelved floor to ceiling with volumes in varying states of age and repair, lit by tall windows that let in long panels of gray light. It smelled of old parchment and beeswax, and the faint ghost of countless candles. She pulled records, histories, trade documents, anything that helped her understand the political geography of what Caius had described in the carriage. The 4 Alpha Lords, the undocumented meetings, the economic argument built into Ashenvale's wool trade. On the 3rd morning, Caius found her there. He stood in the doorway for a moment before she acknowledged him. She had heard him coming, his footsteps distinct from the lighter tread of servants. And when she looked up from the document spread across the reading table, he crossed the room and looked at what she was reading without comment. "You found the Ashenvale regional trade records," he said. Your library is well organized, she said. Your archivist deserves acknowledgement. I will tell him. He pulled the chair across from her and sat, which struck her as interesting. He did not stand over the table, did not occupy the room the way powerful men often did, expanding to fill available space. He sat at her level. My intelligence keeper has returned from his second visit to the curandero. The man is willing to testify. Bonnie set down the document. What changed his mind? The knowledge that the woman who paid him to alter the records had also filed a petition accusing a young Omega of mental instability, Caius said. He has a daughter. The comparison was not comfortable for him. Good, Bonnie said. The word came out harder than she intended. She did not soften it. The hearing has been set for 6 days from now. I have summoned the regional council to Caer Dun. All sitting members, including the 3 lords connected to the Ashvale meetings. They will attend because they have no legal grounds to refuse a royal summons, and they will not wish to appear uncooperative before they know how much I know. He paused. Lady Voss has been formally notified. She is required to appear. Bonnie was quiet for a moment, looking at the window. Gray light, the distant shape of mountains beyond the castle walls. And Oswin, she asked. My father's steward? Arrived yesterday. He is housed in the guest quarters near the east gate. He brought the original estate ledgers, 30 years of records in your father's hand, including the last year. Something tightened in her throat. She pressed her palms flat on the table and breathed through it. My father kept detailed records of everything, she said quietly. He used to say that a man who did not write down what he owned was a man asking to lose it. She stopped. He wrote down everything. She would have known that. She would have known that if anyone examined those ledgers carefully, they would see the discrepancies begin precisely 8 months before his death, Caius said, gently but plainly. Yes, Oswin saw it. He has been waiting 6 years for someone with the authority to act on what he saw. Bonnie nodded once, slowly. She thought about Oswin, a quiet, careful man with ink-stained fingers and a habit of double-checking every figure twice. Sitting with those ledgers for 6 years, carrying the weight of what he knew with nowhere to put it. She thought about her father, writing in his careful merchant's hand while the woman he had trusted was quietly, systematically undoing him. The grief and the anger lived side by side in her chest. She had learned in the past days that they could coexist without one consuming the other, if she let them both be what they were. I want to speak to Oswin today, she said. I expected you would. He is expecting you at midday. The hearing convened in Caer Dun's great council chamber 6 days later, beneath vaulted stone ceilings hung with the wolf banners of the kingdom, before a long table of assembled lords and a crowded gallery above. The chamber smelled of candle wax and tension. Bonnie sat to Caius's right, not behind him, not to the side. To his right, at the council table, which was where he had placed her chair and where she remained as the chamber filled. Lady Voss entered with 2 legal advocates and the composed expression of a woman who had prepared extensively for a battle she expected to win on procedural grounds. She found her seat across the table and arranged herself with perfect stillness. Her eyes moved once to Bonnie, and then away, a controlled flicker, revealing nothing. Then the curandero was brought in. His name was Edmund Farr. He was a thin man in his 50s, with the particular hollowness of someone who had been carrying guilt long enough for it to change the shape of his face. He sat in the witness chair, and in the careful, halting manner of someone who had rehearsed the words many times and was still afraid of them, he told the council what he had recorded, what he had been paid to alter, and what Lord Edric Voss had actually died of. The chamber was very still while he spoke. Lady Voss's advocate began an objection on procedural grounds. Caius raised one hand, a single, unhurried gesture, and the objection stopped before it was complete. Then Oswin spoke. He brought the ledgers. He laid them on the council table and opened them to the pages he had marked, and he walked the council through 30 years of careful merchant record-keeping, and then through the 8 months where the careful hand began to change, where entries began to be adjusted, where funds began to move in directions that had no corresponding purpose in the estate's legitimate operations. It took most of the morning. When it was done, the 3 alpha lords connected to the Ashvale meetings had not spoken. They had sat with the particular rigidity of men calculating distances. Caius addressed them directly, quietly, without performance. He named the undocumented meetings. He named the dates. He named the locations. He did not accuse. He simply demonstrated, with the precision of someone who had been preparing this for 6 months, that he knew exactly what had been assembled in the shadows of his kingdom, and that the assembly was finished. 2 of the 3 lords requested private audience with the crown before the day was out. The third, Lord Ashvale Sr., sat in his chair and aged visibly. Lady Voss was escorted from the council chamber by the king's guard before midday. Her legal advocates left their papers on the table and did not retrieve them. That evening, the castle was quieter than it had been since Bonnie arrived. She stood in the courtyard garden in her charcoal cloak, the cold night air carrying the smell of frost and pine, and she looked at the sky above the castle walls, black and entirely covered in stars, the kind of sky that only appeared over mountains where there was no town light to diminish it. She heard Caius before she saw him. He came without a torch, which told her his wolf's eyes needed none. He stood beside her and looked up at the same sky. "It is done," she said, not a question. "The petition is dissolved. Your inheritance is formally restored. The estate reverts to your control immediately." He paused. "Lady Voss will stand before the full judicial council within the month. Edmund Farr's testimony has been recorded and sealed under royal authority. It cannot be withdrawn." Bonnie breathed in slowly. Cold air, pine, the mineral sharpness of stone. "My father," she said. "Will be answered for," Caius said, "completely." She was quiet for a long time. The stars were very bright. Somewhere above the walls, a night bird called once and went silent. "I have been thinking," she said finally, "about your proposal." He waited. "I came here believing I understood the arrangement," she said. "Protection for testimony, political utility on both sides, a marriage that served a strategic purpose." She turned to look at him. In the starlight, his face was all shadow and angle, those blue eyes steady on hers. "But I have spent 10 days watching how you move through this castle, how you speak to your council, how you spoke to Edmund Farr this morning, with enough gravity to make him feel that what he had done mattered, not only as evidence, but as a human wrong." She paused. "I have been watching for the thing underneath the strategy, trying to find where the performance is. And," he said quietly, "I cannot find it," she said. "I have looked carefully. I am good at looking carefully." She held his gaze. "Either you are the most accomplished deceiver I have ever encountered, or you are simply what you appear to be." "I am not a simple man," Caius said. "No," she agreed, "but you may be an honest one." The silence between them was not the silence of things unspoken. It was the silence of 2 people who had been moving toward a moment and had finally arrived at it, and were standing in it without pretending otherwise. "My wolf has never spoken," Bonnie said. "She has been silent my entire life. I do not know if she will ever come. I do not know what I am without her, in a world that uses her presence to measure worth." She kept her eyes on his. "I want you to know that I am not waiting to become someone more acceptable before I answer you properly. This is who I am, the woman who stayed standing. No more and no less." Caius reached out, and with a deliberateness that gave her every opportunity to step back, placed his hand over hers where it rested on the garden wall. Warm, steady, not gripping, just present. "I know who you are," he said. "I asked her to marry me." Something broke open in Bonnie's chest. Not painfully, but with the specific relief of something that had been held shut for a very long time finally being allowed to open. Her eyes filled briefly. She did not look away. "Then yes," she said. "My full answer is yes." They were married in the great hall of Caer Dun on the first clear morning of early spring, when the mountain air carried the first suggestion of thaw, and the courtyard garden showed the earliest green at the tips of the hedgerows. It was not a large ceremony. Caius had offered her whatever scale she wished, and she had chosen something witnessed, but not performed. The council members, Oswin, Petra, Marta, and the castle's sworn guard lining the walls. No elaborate procession, no display. She wore deep green wool with silver at the cuffs, and her blonde braid was wound with a thread of dark ribbon. Caius wore black, as he always did, with the silver wolf clasp at his shoulder. When the binding words were spoken, and the cord was wrapped around their joined hands in the old tradition, she felt something shift inside her, something she had no name for, a warmth that started in her chest and moved outward, and in the very back of her consciousness, in a place she had checked so many times and found empty, something stirred, not loudly, not dramatically, just a breath, like a creature waking slowly from a very long sleep. Bonnie's hand tightened around Caius's. He looked at her immediately, with the attention of someone who did not miss small things. She shook her head slightly, later, and he accepted it without question, returning his gaze to the officiant, his thumb moving once, briefly, across her knuckles. Lady Voss answered to the full judicial council 3 weeks after the wedding. Edmund Farr's testimony stood. Oswin's ledgers stood. The advocates Lady Voss had retained withdrew from the case on the second day of proceedings. She was stripped of the widow's administration rights to the Voss estate, held accountable for the financial alterations of the past 6 years, and formally barred from any claim on the lands or holdings of the Voss name. She left the council chamber a smaller woman than she had entered it. Not broken. Bonnie did not need her broken. She needed her answered. There was a difference, and it mattered. Lord Ashvale Sr. negotiated a quiet withdrawal from his alliances with the Crown in exchange for a reduced censure that preserved his house's standing. His son Devon sent a formal letter of apology that Bonnie read once, set aside, and did not respond to. There was nothing in it she required. The other regional lords fell back into their proper arrangements. The wool trade of the Northern Valley was formally returned to the Voss estate, administered now by Oswin, under the direct oversight of the Crown. The original documents, the ones that bore her father's careful merchant hand across 30 years of honest work, were sealed in the royal archive at Caer Dun, where they would remain. Oswin wept, briefly, in the council chamber when the final order was recorded. He composed himself quickly and apologized. Bonnie told him there was nothing to apologize for, and she meant it completely. On the night the last matter was formally closed, Bonnie stood again in the courtyard garden. The spring had arrived properly now. The hedgerows were fully green. The air smelled of earth and new growth, and the particular clarity that comes after a long winter releases its hold. Somewhere in the castle behind her, torches burned in the corridor windows, and the sound of the evening meal drifted down from the great hall. The wolf came to her from the far end of the garden. She heard it before she saw it, the soft displacement of air that a large creature made when it moved with the particular grace of something born to it. It came and sat beside her, close enough that its warmth pressed against her leg, and she looked down at it for a long moment. She placed her hand on its head. Dark fur, very soft. The wolf was still beneath her touch. Inside her, deep and quiet and entirely real, she felt her own wolf stir again, not rushing, not dramatic, simply present, the way a fire is present when it has finally caught after many attempts, burning low and steady and entirely committed to continuing. She had spent 23 years believing she was incomplete. She understood now that she had simply been waiting for the right ground, for the right moment, for the particular combination of truth and safety and choice that allowed something long dormant to recognize that it was finally allowed to exist. Caius shifted beside her, the wolf becoming the man between one breath and the next, the way it always looked slightly impossible and entirely natural at once. And he stood next to her in the garden, with his dark braids loose over his shoulders and his blue eyes on the night sky. She leaned against his arm. Not dramatically, just the small, certain weight of a person choosing to be where they are. He did not move. He did not speak. He simply remained, solid and present, exactly as he had been from the first night outside her door. They stood there while the stars emerged one by one above the castle walls, and the garden held its quiet around them, and the long cold thing that had lived in Bonnie's chest since the morning she had sat beside her father's hand and felt it stop gripping back. That long cold thing, at last, was gone. She was home. Not because of the castle walls, or the title, or the green fields of the Voss estate finally returned to her name, because she had chosen this. Clearly, with full knowledge, with eyes open, she had chosen this man, this place, this life, and she was never leaving it.